John and Sarah Thompson had been the pillars of a strong, loving relationship for 2 decades. Their life in a quiet suburban neighborhood was marked by a deep, unwavering commitment to each other and to their 2 children, Emma, 18, and Max, 15. John worked as a car mechanic at a local garage, a job he had held for over 15 years, known in the community for his reliability and skill. Sarah, on the other hand, spent her days shaping young minds as an elementary school teacher. The couple had met in their early 20s at a community college event. It was not just attraction that brought them together, but a shared set of values and dreams. They married young, driven by a mutual desire to build a stable and nurturing home for the family they planned to have. Their marriage was characterized by open communication, mutual support, and a clear division of household responsibilities, which they adjusted as needed to fit their growing family's needs. Financially, they were not wealthy, but they managed their income prudently, ensuring they always had enough to cover their expenses and save for their children's education. Their home was modest but filled with warmth and laughter. Sarah's meticulous nature complemented John's more laid-back approach, creating a balanced environment for their children. On weekends, the family often engaged in activities together, such as biking through the nearby park or visiting the local library for story sessions. Evenings were typically reserved for family dinners, during which everyone shared details of their day. John and Sarah made it a point to attend all events important to their children, be it a school play, a soccer match, or a parent-teacher conference. Despite the routine nature of their lives, the couple never let their romantic spark fade. They maintained their relationship with regular date nights, sometimes just a quiet dinner at their favorite local restaurant or a movie night at home after the kids had gone to bed. One such evening, as they cleared the dinner table together, John smiled at Sarah, a look of appreciation in his eyes. "You know, I'm really glad we've kept up with these little traditions of ours," he said, handing her the last of the dinner plates. Sarah returned the smile, drying her hands on a towel. "Me too. It's these little things that keep us connected, isn't it?" she replied, her tone affectionate. "Absolutely," John agreed, pulling her into a brief hug. "Doesn't matter how busy we get, we've always got to make time for us." This harmony, however, was soon to be tested in ways neither could have anticipated. It was a typical morning when John received a phone call that would set the stage for the challenges to come. The call was from a lawyer informing him that his estranged father had passed away and left him a significant inheritance. The news was unexpected, not just because John had little contact with his father over the years, but also because of the sheer amount of the inheritance mentioned. The revelation of this inheritance introduced an element of uncertainty into John and Sarah's stable life. While initially it seemed like a financial blessing, the couple could not predict the strain it would soon place on their relationship. As John processed the news, his thoughts were conflicted. He felt a surge of possibilities opened by the financial windfall, but also apprehension about the sudden change in their lives. Sarah noticed the change in John's demeanor as he hung up the phone. "What was that about?" she inquired, concern lining her face. "It was a lawyer," John began, his voice uncertain. "My father, he passed away, left me something substantial." "Oh, John, I'm so sorry," Sarah said, reaching out to touch his arm. Her response was instinctive, a blend of sympathy for the loss and worry for the implications it brought. As they stood in their kitchen, the weight of the inheritance and its potential impact on their future loomed large. The stability and love that had been the foundation of their marriage were about to be tested by the shadows of a past John thought he had left behind. John stood at the kitchen counter, phone in hand, his expression frozen as the lawyer's words echoed in his ears. The call had been brief, the news delivered in a formal, almost indifferent tone. John's father, a man he had scarcely spoken to in over a decade, had passed away, leaving him an inheritance far beyond any figure he had ever contemplated. As he replaced the receiver, a deep silence filled the room, thickening the air between John and Sarah. She watched him closely, noting the complex swirl of emotions crossing his face. John's relationship with his father had been strained and distant, marked by years of misunderstandings and disagreements, particularly about the way his father had managed his business and personal life. That his father had left him anything at all was surprising, let alone a sum that would fundamentally change their lives. "John, are you all right?" Sarah's voice was gentle, laced with concern. She moved closer, her presence a calming force as always. "It's just a lot to take in," John replied, his voice low. He leaned back against the counter, the weight of the inheritance pressing down on him. "I haven't even thought about him in years, and now this. It feels strange to reconnect with him like this, through his will." Sarah nodded, understanding the complexity of emotions her husband must be feeling. "It's a big change, unexpected, but we'll figure it out together," she reassured him, her hand finding his and squeezing it lightly. The inheritance was not just a financial windfall, it was a reminder of the unresolved issues John had with his father. The man had been a successful businessman, but his personal relationships, especially with John, had suffered because of his relentless focus on work and accumulating wealth. Now, even in death, it seemed he was reaching out, affecting John's life in profound ways. In the days that followed, John found himself thinking more about his father, trying to reconcile the man he remembered with the one who had left him such a significant legacy. He dug out old photographs from a dusty album tucked away in the attic, each image sparking a flicker of memories, some bitter, some sweet. One evening, as they sat in the living room with the kids gone to bed, John shared these thoughts with Sarah. "Looking at these photos, I see so much of my life that he wasn't part of. And now, he leaves me this money," he mused, his voice tinged with confusion and resentment. Sarah listened, her eyes soft with empathy. "Maybe this was his way of trying to make amends," she suggested. "Maybe in his own way he was trying to reach out, to do something good with the little connection he felt he still had." "It's possible," John conceded, though skepticism lingered. "But it doesn't change the past. It doesn't change how distant we became or how much was left unsaid." As they talked, John realized that the inheritance was more than just a sum of money. It was a catalyst for confronting his feelings about his father. It forced him to reflect on what he wanted to carry forward and what he preferred to leave behind. Despite the complexities, he recognized an opportunity, not just to secure his family's financial future, but to address and perhaps heal some of the wounds left by his strained relationship with his father. "I guess this is as much about closure as it is about the money," John finally said, a resolution forming in his mind. "I need to use this chance not just to provide for us, but to settle things in my heart." Sarah smiled, squeezing his hand again. "And whatever you decide, I'm here. We're all here with you." The conversation that night didn't solve everything, but it allowed John to start processing his mixed feelings about the inheritance and his father. It was a beginning, a first step towards understanding and maybe one day, acceptance. The news of the inheritance began to subtly influence John's everyday life. Initially, the changes were hardly noticeable, even to Sarah, who knew him best. John found himself lost in thought more often, his mind wandering to the possibilities that the newfound wealth brought with it. Sometimes he would stare out of the window during breakfast, his coffee growing cold in front of him, a faraway look in his eyes. At the garage where he worked, John's usual focus seemed to waver. He was slower in completing his tasks, his hands mechanically moving as he replaced parts and performed diagnostics, but his thoughts were elsewhere. His colleagues noticed a drop in his usual banter and quick laughter. "Everything all right, John?" Mike, a fellow mechanic, asked one slow afternoon as they worked on an old Chevrolet. "Yeah, just got a lot on my mind, John responded, forcing a smile and wiping his hands on a rag. His brief reply was enough to stave off further inquiries, but not enough to dispel the growing concern among his friends. Sarah also began to notice more pronounced changes at home. John, usually meticulous about their finances, started showing an unusual disinterest in their budget meetings, which they held every month to ensure they were on track with their savings and expenses. During their last meeting, he seemed distracted, nodding absent-mindedly as Sarah discussed their expenditures. "John, are you sure you're listening? We need to decide if we're going to use some of the savings for Emma's college fund now or wait," Sarah pressed, sensing his detachment. "Oh yeah, sure, we can wait," he replied vaguely, not really engaging with the question. It was unlike him to defer such decisions without a thorough discussion. Moreover, John's usual eagerness to spend time with the family started to diminish. He skipped a couple of family game nights, opting instead to stay late at work or sit alone in the den, poring over various papers he had brought home from the lawyer's office dealing with the inheritance. Even his interaction with his children changed. He was more absent-minded, often having to be reminded of his commitments, like Max's upcoming parent-teacher conference. One evening, as Sarah was clearing up after dinner and John was supposed to be helping, she found him staring at his phone, lost in whatever he was reading. It took a few louder clinks of dishes before he looked up. "Sorry, I was just looking at something," he mumbled, quickly putting his phone away and joining her at the sink. "What's on your mind, John? You've been really out of it lately," Sarah asked, handing him a dish to dry. "It's just this whole inheritance thing. It's a lot to manage, more than I thought. Meetings with lawyers, calls about the estate, it's overwhelming," John admitted, drying the plate with more force than necessary. "I know it's a lot, but remember, I'm here to help too. We can handle it together," Sarah reassured him, though she was worried about how distracted he had become. "Yeah, I know. I'm sorry, I just never expected any of this. It's like every day there's something new to deal with," John explained, his tone mixed with frustration and a hint of excitement that he couldn't quite hide. As days turned into weeks, the impact of the inheritance on John's behavior grew more evident. His usual careful consideration of family and work was edged out by a growing preoccupation with the future that the inheritance promised. He began to spend hours on the internet, researching investments and luxury items they had never considered before, like expensive vacations and high-end cars. These changes marked the beginning of a transformation in John, one that subtly steered him away from the man he had been before the inheritance, a man deeply rooted in the values of hard work and family. Now he stood at the precipice of a new identity, molded by wealth and the myriad possibilities it brought with it, not yet aware of the strain it was placing on his relationships and his own sense of self. As the weeks passed since the inheritance announcement, John's behavior continued to shift dramatically. The once attentive and loving husband and father now found himself increasingly irritable and detached from his family. This change was not only evident in his absence at family events, but also in his growing criticism over mundane household matters that he previously overlooked or handled with humor. Sarah first noticed this one evening while preparing dinner. John, who usually praised her cooking, frowned upon tasting the sauce she was simmering on the stove. "This needs more salt. Can't you taste that?" he remarked sharply, his tone more accusatory than constructive. Sarah, taken aback by his sudden critique, tried to keep the atmosphere light. "I thought it was just right, but let's add a bit more for your taste," she responded, reaching for the salt. Despite her efforts to diffuse the tension, John's comments left a bitter taste that wasn't due to the food. This type of interaction became more frequent. John's critiques extended beyond the kitchen to the cleanliness of the house, the way Sarah managed the grocery budget, and even how she spent her free time. One Saturday, as Sarah was sorting through bills and trying to align their budget with the new financial considerations, John walked into the room and scoffed at the stack of papers before her. "Are you ever going to get through that mess? It looks like you're just shuffling papers around. You need to be more efficient," he snapped, his words cutting through the quiet of the room. Stung by his harshness, Sarah looked up, her expression a mixture of surprise and hurt. "I'm doing the best I can, John. There's a lot to manage with the house and the kids. I could use a bit more help rather than criticism," she replied, her voice steady despite the emotion behind it. John paused, seeming to catch himself. "Right, I'm sorry. It's just been stressful with all this inheritance stuff," he muttered before leaving the room, the issue unresolved and the air still thick with tension. The criticisms and John's increasingly high expectations created a charged atmosphere at home. The children, too, began to notice the change in their father. Emma approached her mother one evening while they were clearing the dishes, her voice low. "Mom, why is Dad always so upset these days? He got mad at me for leaving a book on the table." Sarah sighed, putting down the plate she was drying. "Your father has a lot on his mind lately. Just try to keep things tidy, okay? It might help," she advised. though she knew the issue ran deeper than a misplaced book. John's irritability did not abate as the days went on. One afternoon, he exploded over a small stain on the carpet, a stain that had been there for months unnoticed. "Why is this still here? Haven't you noticed it? You should pay more attention to the cleaning," he said sharply to Sarah, who was equally perplexed by his sudden focus on such a trivial issue. "I'll clean it up now," Sarah responded quietly, masking her frustration. As she scrubbed the stain, she couldn't help but feel a growing distance between her and John. It seemed as if the man she had married was slowly being overshadowed by someone who was perpetually dissatisfied and quick to find fault. This pattern of behavior reached a peak one evening when John criticized the way Sarah had arranged the living room furniture, a layout they had both previously agreed upon. "Why did you move the couch here? It makes the whole room look cramped. Can't you see that?" His voice was louder than necessary, and it was clear that his annoyance was about more than just the furniture. Exhausted by the constant critiques, Sarah confronted him. "John, this isn't like you. You're always upset, always pointing out what's wrong, what's really going on. This isn't just about the furniture or the carpet, is it?" John paused, the frustration evident on his face. He was silent for a moment, then admitted, "I don't know, Sarah. I just feel overwhelmed, like nothing's right anymore." This admission marked a turning point for John, as he began to realize the impact his behavior was having on his family. The once harmonious household was now a place of tension and unease, all stemming from his inability to cope with the emotional ramifications of his inheritance. The tension in the Thompson household reached its peak one rainy evening, culminating in a heated argument that epitomized the growing rift between John and Sarah. The day had been fraught with minor irritations for John: a lost tool at the shop, a canceled appointment, and a traffic jam on the way home. Each annoyance piled up, ready to spill over by the time he arrived home. Sarah had spent the day dealing with her own challenges, including a demanding parent-teacher conference and unexpected expenses that needed to be added to their already tight budget. She was in the kitchen, calculating numbers and trying to make ends meet, when John stormed in, visibly agitated. The catalyst for the argument was trivial, yet telling. John noticed that the dinner Sarah was preparing was not what he had expected. "Why are we having pasta again? Didn't we just have this the other day?" he snapped, his tone harsher than he intended. Sarah, already stressed and tired, responded with more edge than usual. "It's what we have in the pantry, and it's quick." "I didn't have time to go to the store today," she retorted, her patience thinning. John's frustration quickly escalated, his voice raising. "It's always something with you, isn't it? Can't you plan better? I need something decent after the day I've had." Sarah turned from the stove, her expression a mix of disbelief and frustration. "Decent? I'm trying to manage 100 things, John. What do you want from me?" Her voice matched his in intensity, reflecting the buildup of weeks of tension. "You could try appreciating what I'm going through with this whole inheritance mess instead of complaining. You think it's easy handling all that money, the lawyers, the expectations?" John shot back, gesturing wildly, his words spilling out in a torrent of pent-up emotion. "And you think it's easy running this house? Handling the kids, the bills, your bad moods?" Sarah's response was sharp, her usual calm demeanor shattered by the constant criticism. The argument spiraled quickly, touching on every sore point in their relationship: communication, responsibilities, appreciation. John criticized, and Sarah defended, each counterpoint driving a deeper wedge between them. "I don't even recognize you anymore, John. This inheritance, it's like it's changed you into someone I can't connect with," Sarah exclaimed, her voice breaking with emotion. John paused, the anger in his eyes fading into confusion and hurt. I'm just trying to do what's best for us, for our future. But maybe you're right. Maybe I am changing," he admitted, his voice lowering as he began to absorb the impact of his words and her distress. The room fell silent, the only sound the steady drumming of rain against the windows. John looked at Sarah, really looked at her, and saw the strain and sadness in her face. It dawned on him then how disconnected he had become, lost in the whirlwind of financial possibilities and drifting away from the very people he was supposed to protect and cherish. "I'm sorry, Sarah, I didn't mean. I don't want us to fight. I just feel so overwhelmed," John said, his voice softening, the anger dissipating as he approached her. He reached out, tentatively taking her hands in his. "I need help. Maybe we need help. I don't want to lose us to this." Sarah, her eyes moist with unshed tears, nodded, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly. "I don't want that either. We need to figure this out together, but no more shutting me out, okay?" John squeezed her hands gently, a silent promise. "Okay," he agreed, the weight of their shared challenges settling around them, but with a renewed sense of partnership. This significant argument, while painful, was a necessary catharsis for John and Sarah. It broke down the walls of miscommunication and criticism, paving the way for a more open dialogue about their fears, expectations, and the future. It was a turning point, marking the beginning of a journey towards understanding and healing in their relationship. Weeks after their intense argument, the atmosphere in the Thompson household remained strained and somber. John's internal struggles with the implications of his inheritance had not subsided, and his perspective on his life and marriage had darkened considerably. Despite efforts to communicate more openly with Sarah, his emotions and thoughts had continued to spiral into a place of detachment and cold rationality. One evening, as Sarah was setting the table for dinner, John walked into the dining room with a set expression, his demeanor more serious than usual. Sarah sensed immediately that something was amiss. "John, what's wrong?" she asked, her voice tinged with concern, noticing that he was not his usual self. John paused, looking at Sarah with a mix of resignation and resolve. "Sarah, we need to talk," he began, his voice steady but cold. "I've been thinking a lot about us, about my life and where I see it going." Sarah felt a chill at his tone, a premonition of something dire. She nodded for him to continue, bracing herself for what was to come. "I've realized that this inheritance has opened new possibilities for me, possibilities I want to explore alone," John said bluntly, his words cutting through the quiet of the room. "I think it would be best for both of us if we went our separate ways." Sarah stood frozen, the plate she was holding almost slipping from her hands. "What are you saying, John? Are you talking about divorce?" Her voice was a mix of disbelief and pain. "Yes, divorce," John confirmed, his voice devoid of the warmth it once held for her. "I believe this is the right step forward. For me." The words struck Sarah like a physical blow, her heart sinking as the reality of his words settled in. "So this is it? You get some money and suddenly our life together means nothing?" Her words were sharp, a defense against the overwhelming hurt. "It's not just about the money," John attempted to explain, though his rationalizations felt hollow even to him. "It's about me needing space, a change. I think I owe it to myself to find out what I can do on my own." "And what about us? What about our family?" Sarah's voice cracked, the pain evident. "Does that mean nothing to you now?" John sighed, a part of him wincing at the pain he was causing. "I care about you and the kids, Sarah, I do. That's why I'm prepared to offer you a generous settlement. You won't have to worry about finances." Sarah shook her head, tears brimming in her eyes, her voice rising with emotion. "You think you can just pay us off? That money can replace the years, the life we built together?" "I'm trying to be fair," John said, feeling the finality of the conversation deep in his chest. "It's better this way, for both of us in the long run." The room fell silent, the tension thick between them. Sarah looked at John, really looked at him, and saw a man she no longer recognized. The John she knew, the one who laughed with her, who supported her, seemed to have vanished, replaced by this stranger making calculated decisions based on wealth and individualism. Finally, Sarah spoke, her voice quiet but firm. "If that's your decision, I can't stop you, but don't pretend this is for me or that this is fair. You're choosing money and possibilities over your family. I hope one day you realize what you've lost." With that, Sarah left the room, her dinner preparations forgotten. John stood alone, the gravity of his decision settling around him. As he listened to the silence that followed, a deep, unsettling feeling began to gnaw at him, hinting that maybe he had made a grave mistake. After John's cold declaration of divorce, Sarah was left reeling, yet her initial shock soon gave way to a steely resolve. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to John's inheritance than met the eye, and if their marriage was to end, she was determined to understand all its aspects fully. Determined to uncover the true nature of the inheritance, Sarah started by gathering all the financial documents John had left around the house. Each paper, each receipt, and each legal document were meticulously examined as she sat at the kitchen table, papers spread out in an organized chaos. One afternoon, she called John's lawyer, the one who had been handling the estate affairs. "Hello, Mr. Daniels. This is Sarah Thompson. I have a few questions about the estate my husband inherited," she said, her voice steady despite the undercurrent of tension. "Of course, Mrs. Thompson. What do you need to know?" the lawyer replied, his voice courteous yet cautious. "I need a full understanding of everything involved. John mentioned debts that were tied to the inheritance. Can you tell me more about these?" Sarah prodded, her pen poised over a notepad ready to take notes. There was a slight pause on the line before Mr. Daniels responded. "Yes, there are significant debts tied to the estate. Your husband's father had been involved in several failed business ventures before his passing. Unfortunately, these have resulted in substantial financial liabilities that are now part of the estate." The confirmation of debt hit Sarah harder than she expected, but she pressed on. "Can you provide me with the specific figures and the nature of these businesses?" she asked, her tone professional, masking the emotional weight of her inquiry. Mr. Daniels provided the details, and Sarah wrote down everything. The numbers were staggering, nearly as large as the inheritance itself. The implications of this were severe. It meant that the inheritance was not the windfall John believed it to be. Instead, it was a complex financial trap lined with liability and risk. With this new information, Sarah's perspective shifted. She saw how the allure of sudden wealth could blind someone to reality, and she felt a twinge of sympathy for John. However, sympathy didn't deter her from seeking the full truth. Over the next few days, Sarah consulted with a financial advisor, explaining her situation without delving into the personal implications. "Given these debts, what would be the best course of action for someone in my husband's position?" she inquired during one of their meetings. The advisor laid it out clearly. "It's crucial to handle such debts wisely. They can overshadow the asset's value, turning what seems like an inheritance into a burden. If not managed correctly, it could lead to more severe financial issues down the line." Armed with this information, Sarah felt a newfound determination to confront John. It wasn't just about their marriage now. It was about ensuring he didn't fall into a financial abyss out of ignorance and misplaced enthusiasm for his new life. As she organized her findings, Sarah realized that this investigation was not just about financial insight, but also about gaining the knowledge and leverage she needed to handle the forthcoming legal and emotional challenges. This was about safeguarding her future and potentially helping John see the reality of his situation before it was too late. A few weeks after her revelation about the debts tied to John's inheritance, Sarah decided it was time to confront John with what she had discovered. Her investigation had armed her with facts and figures, but the weight of the situation lay heavy on her heart. Despite the tension between them, she cared deeply for John and knew he needed to understand the full implications of his new financial situation. John had been avoiding lengthy conversations with her since announcing his intentions for divorce, but Sarah insisted they talk. "John, we need to discuss the inheritance more thoroughly," she started, as she sat down across from him at the dining room table one evening. John looked wary but nodded. "Okay, what about it?" he asked, his tone guarded. Sarah took a deep breath, organizing her thoughts. "I've been doing some digging into the estate, John. There's something you need to see." She laid out the documents she had gathered, pointing to the numbers that highlighted the massive debt associated with his inheritance. John's eyes widened as he scanned the documents. "What is all this? This can't be right," he stammered, his initial disbelief turning into confusion. "It's all there, John. The debts your father accumulated are overwhelming. They practically consume the inheritance. You're not just inheriting wealth, You're inheriting a significant financial burden, Sarah explained, her voice steady despite the turmoil she felt inside. John looked up from the papers, his face pale. But the lawyer said it was a clean transfer, that everything was taken care of. Sarah shook her head. It seems there were things not fully explained to you. Or maybe you didn't want to hear them at the time. These debts are real, and they're substantial. If you don't handle this correctly, it could ruin you financially. John leaned back, running his hands through his hair, visibly shaken by the news. I had no idea. I thought this was going to be a fresh start for me, he said, his voice breaking slightly. Sarah's heart ached for him, seeing him so vulnerable, but she knew this was a necessary confrontation. I know you did, but ignoring these debts won't make them go away. You have to face this head on, and you have to be smart about it. John was silent for a moment, then met her eyes. What do I do, Sarah? I don't know where to begin with this. That's why I'm here, Sarah said softly. I've spoken to a financial advisor. There are ways to manage this, but you're going to need support, my support. John nodded slowly, the reality of his situation sinking in. I've been such a fool, he murmured. I let this money idea get to my head, and I pushed you away when I needed you the most. Sarah reached across the table, offering her hand. It's not too late to sort this out, John, but we need to work together on this. We're still a team, aren't we? John took her hand, his grip firm yet filled with a new understanding. Yes, we are. Thank you, Sarah, for doing this, for saving me from making a huge mistake. This confrontation marked a turning point for John, as he realized the depth of his misjudgments and the value of Sarah's presence and wisdom in his life. It was a painful yet clarifying exchange that reshaped their relationship and their future, steering them away from the brink of a potentially disastrous decision. After their pivotal confrontation, John and Sarah were left to face the financial quagmire and their strained personal ties. The realization of the actual state of the inheritance had a sobering effect on John, and he began to see the many ways he had allowed himself to drift away from the core values and relationships that truly mattered. The next few days were spent in quiet contemplation and long discussions as John and Sarah mapped out their strategy for dealing with the debts in their marriage. John, now more receptive and engaged, sought Sarah's input on every decision. One evening, they sat down in their home office, papers spread out before them, a calculator at hand. We need a solid plan to manage these debts, John stated, more to himself than to Sarah, his tone serious but calm. Sarah nodded, looking over the documents. First, we should prioritize the debts by interest rate and amount. We pay off the high-interest ones first to prevent them from growing larger, she suggested, her practical mind kicking into gear. John agreed, impressed by her financial acumen. That makes sense. And maybe we should meet with a debt counselor to explore if consolidating some of these debts is possible, he added. As they discussed their options, a new dynamic began to form between them, one of teamwork and mutual respect. It was a stark contrast to the tension that had permeated their relationship just weeks before. In the midst of their planning, John paused, looking at Sarah with renewed appreciation. I can't believe how patient you've been with me after everything I've put you through, he said earnestly. Sarah met his gaze, her expression softening. We promised for better, for worse, didn't we? I meant it, John. I know you did too. This exchange marked a significant shift in their relationship. They began to spend more evenings together, not just working on their financial issues, but reconnecting on a personal level. They reinstated their weekly date nights, sometimes going out to a modest dinner, other times just walking through the neighborhood, talking about everything except money and debts. John started opening up about his fears and insecurities that the inheritance had brought to the surface. I thought this money would make me happy, give me freedom, but it just made me realize how much I value the life we have here together, he confessed during one of their walks. Sarah squeezed his hand, feeling the bond between them strengthening. I'm glad you see that, and whatever happens, we'll face it together like we always have. Their discussions also led to practical changes in how they managed their finances. They set stricter budgets, cut unnecessary expenses, and even started a small side business to bring in extra income. Every dollar saved was directed towards reducing the debt, a shared goal that kept them focused and united. As they worked through their plan, the couple not only rebuilt their financial security but also rediscovered the reasons they had fallen in love in the first place. Their mutual effort to overcome the crisis rekindled their affection and respect for each other, serving as a reminder that together they could tackle any challenge life threw their way. This period of reconciliation and planning was not just about mending their finances, but was a profound journey back to each other, healing the wounds inflicted by misunderstanding and miscommunication. John and Sarah emerged from this phase stronger, their partnership revitalized, and their commitment to their marriage reaffirmed. Months after they began tackling the daunting financial challenges, John and Sarah decided to renew their vows in a small, intimate ceremony at their favorite local park. This decision came naturally, as both felt they had reached a new chapter in their lives, one built on even stronger foundations than before. The crisis had brought them closer, taught them the value of their bond, and reminded them of their resilience as a couple. The day of the vow renewal was sunny and bright, reflecting the hopeful spirit that had grown between them. Family and close friends gathered, witnessing the renewal of their commitment to each other. Standing hand in hand under the canopy of blossoming trees, John looked into Sarah's eyes, his voice steady and full of emotion. "Sarah, the past year has tested us in ways I never imagined. I was lost, but you stood by me, guiding us back to where we needed to be. Today, I recommit myself to you, not just as your husband, but as your partner, your supporter, and your friend." Sarah's eyes glistened with tears as she took her turn. "John, through the storms and calm, you have been my constant. This challenge showed me the depth of your commitment and love. I vow once more to be by your side, to support and love you in all the days to come." Their friends and family applauded as they kissed, sealing their promises. The simplicity of the ceremony mirrored their renewed outlook on life, a focus on what truly mattered: family, love, and togetherness. After the ceremony, as the guests mingled and celebrated, John and Sarah stood together, quietly observing the joy around them. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" John remarked, squeezing Sarah's hand. "We really have," Sarah agreed, leaning her head on his shoulder. "It feels like we've rediscovered something precious that we almost lost." As the evening progressed, they shared their future plans with their friends. They spoke about their continued efforts to resolve the financial issues, which were now well on their way to being managed effectively. They talked about their small side business, which had started to flourish, bringing them not just additional income, but also a shared project that they both enjoyed. Moreover, they discussed their hopes for the future, plans for traveling together once the debts were fully cleared, dreams of seeing Emma graduate from college, and simple aspirations like enjoying their upcoming anniversaries. Each plan was steeped in a commitment to face challenges united, as a team stronger and more connected than ever. Their friends and family listened, inspired by the couple's journey and the palpable strength of their renewed bond. It was evident to all that John and Sarah's relationship had not only survived the trial, but had emerged richer and deeper. The evening ended with John and Sarah walking home together, the stars bright above them. They talked about the day, about the warmth of their friends' wishes, and the joy of feeling reaffirmed in their partnership. "I think we're more than back on track," John said thoughtfully. "We're on a new, better path." "Yes, a path we've carved together, with understanding and patience," Sarah added, her voice content. Their conversation drifted to plans for the next few weeks, each speaking with excitement about the future, no longer as two individuals struggling with unexpected burdens, but as a couple united in purpose and in heart. This chapter in their lives had begun with uncertainty and turmoil, but ended with a celebration of renewed love and partnership. John and Sarah's story was a testament to the power of commitment and the enduring strength of love through adversity.